Section 6 of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Certainly Nancy had gone with them, since Minta Doyle had asked it with her dumb look, holding out her hand, as Nancy made off, after lunch, to her attic, to escape the horror of family life. She supposed she must go, then. She did not want to go. She did not want to be drawn into it all. For, as they walked along the road to the cliff, Minta kept on taking her hand. Then she would let it go. Then she would take it again. What was it she wanted? Nancy asked herself. There was something, of course, that people wanted. For when Minta took her hand and held it, Nancy, reluctantly, saw the whole world spread out beneath her, as if it were Constantinople seen through a mist, and then, however heavy-eyed one might be, one must needs ask, is that Santa Sophia? Is that the Golden Horn? So Nancy asked, when Minta took her hand, what is it that she wants? Is it that? And what was that? Here and there emerged from the mist, as Nancy looked down upon life spread beneath her, a pinnacle, a dome, prominent things without names. But when Minta dropped her hand, as she did when they ran down the hillside, all that, the dome, the pinnacle, whatever it was that had protruded through the mist, sank down into it and disappeared. Minta, Andrew observed, was rather a good walker. She wore more sensible clothes than most women. She wore very short skirts and black knickerbockers. She would jump straight into a stream and flounder across. He liked her rashness, but he saw that it would not do. She would kill herself in some idiotic way one of these days. She seemed to be afraid of nothing, except bulls. At the mere sight of a bull in a field, she would throw up her arms and fly screaming, which was the very thing to enrage a bull, of course. But she did not mind owning up to it in the least, one must admit that. She knew she was an awful coward about bulls, she said. She thought she must have been tossed in her perambulator when she was a baby. She didn't seem to mind what she said or did. Suddenly now she pitched down on the edge of the cliff and began to sing some song about "Damn your eyes, damn your eyes." They all had to join in and sing the chorus and shout out together, "Damn your eyes, damn your eyes." But it would be fatal to let the tide come in and cover up all the good hunting grounds before they got onto the beach. Fatal, Paul agreed, springing up, and as they went slithering down, he kept quoting the guide-book about these islands being justly celebrated for their park-like prospects and the extent and variety of their marine curiosities. But it would not do altogether, this shouting and damning your eyes, Andrew felt, picking his way down the cliff, this clapping him on the back and calling him "old fellow," and all that. It would not altogether do. It was the worst of taking women on walks. Once on the beach they separated, he going out onto the Pope's Nose, taking his shoes off and rolling his socks in them, and letting that couple look after themselves. Nancy waded out to her own rocks and searched her own pools, and let that couple look after themselves. She crouched low down and touched the smooth rubber-like sea anemones who were stuck like lumps of jelly to the side of the rock. Brooding, she changed the pool into the sea, and made the minnows into sharks and whales, and cast vast clouds over this tiny world by holding her hand against the sun, and so brought darkness and desolation, like God himself, to millions of ignorant and innocent creatures, and then took her hand away suddenly and let the sun stream down. Out on the pale criss-crossed sand, high-stepping, fringed, gauntleted, stalked some fantastic leviathan. She was still enlarging the pool, and slipped into the vast fissures of the mountain-side. And then, letting her eyes slide imperceptibly above the pool and rest on that wavering line of sea and sky, on the tree trunks which the smoke of steamers made waver on the horizon, she became with all that power sweeping savagely in and inevitably withdrawing, hypnotized, and the two senses of that vastness and this tininess, The pool had diminished again. Flowering within it made her feel that she was bound hand and foot, and unable to move by the intensity of feelings which reduced her own body, her own life, and the lives of all the people in the world, for ever, to nothingness. So, listening to the waves, crouching over the pool, she brooded. And Andrew shouted that the sea was coming in, so she leapt splashing through the shallow waves onto the shore, and ran up the beach, and was carried by her own impetuosity and her desire for rapid movement right behind a rock, and there, oh heavens, in each other's arms, were Paul and Minta kissing probably. She was outraged, indignant. She and Andrew put on their shoes and stockings in dead silence, without saying a thing about it. Indeed, they were rather sharp with each other. She might have called him when she saw the crayfish or whatever it was, Andrew grumbled. However, they both felt, it's not our fault. They had not wanted this horrid nuisance to happen. All the same it irritated Andrew that Nancy should be a woman, and Nancy that Andrew should be a man, and they tied their shoes very neatly and drew the bows rather tight. It was not until they had climbed right up onto the top of the cliff again that Minta cried out that she had lost her grandmother's brooch. Her grandmother's brooch, the sole ornament she possessed. A weeping willow. It was, they must remember it, set in pearls. They must have seen it, she said, with the tears running down her cheeks, the brooch which her grandmother had fastened her cap with till the last day of her life. Now she had lost it. She would rather have lost anything than that. She would go back and look for it. They all went back. They poked and peered and looked. They kept their heads very low and said things shortly and gruffly. Paul Rayleigh searched like a madman all about the rock where they had been sitting. All this pother about a brooch really didn't do at all, Andrew thought, as Paul told him to make a thorough search between this point and that. The tide was coming in fast. The sea would cover the place where they had sat in a minute. There was not a ghost of a chance of their finding it now. "We shall be cut off!" Minta shrieked, suddenly terrified. As if there were any danger of that. It was the same as the bulls all over again. She had no control over her emotions, Andrew thought. Women hadn't. The wretched Paul had to pacify her. The men, Andrew and Paul at once became manly and different from usual, took counsel briefly, and decided that they would plant Rayleigh's stick where they had sat, and come back at low tide again. There was nothing more that could be done now. If the brooch was there, it would still be there in the morning, they assured her, but Minta still sobbed all the way up to the top of the cliff. It was her grandmother's brooch. She would rather have lost anything but that. And yet Nancy felt it might be true that she minded losing her brooch, but she wasn't crying only for that. She was crying for something else. We might all sit down and cry, she felt, but she did not know what for. They drew ahead together, Paul and Minta, and he comforted her and said how famous he was for finding things. Once, when he was a little boy, he had found a gold watch. He would get up at daybreak, and he was positive he would find it. It seemed to him that it would be almost dark, and he would be alone on the beach, and somehow it would be rather dangerous. He began telling her, however, that he would certainly find it, and she said that she would not hear of his getting up at dawn. It was lost. She knew that. She had had a presentiment when she put it on that afternoon. And secretly he resolved that he would not tell her, but he would slip out of the house at dawn when they were all asleep, and if he could not find it, he would go to Edinburgh and buy her another, just like it but more beautiful. He would prove what he could do. And as they came out on the hill, and saw the lights of the town beneath them, the lights coming out suddenly one by one seemed like things that were going to happen to him, his marriage, his children, his house. And again he thought, as they came out onto the high road, which was shaded with high bushes, how they would retreat into solitude together, and walk on and on, he always leading her, and she pressing close to his side, as she did now. As they turned by the crossroads, he thought what an appalling experience he had been through, and he must tell someone—Mrs. Ramsey, of course, for it took his breath away to think what he had been and done. It had been far and away the worst moment of his life when he asked Minta to marry him. He would go straight to Mrs. Ramsey, because he felt somehow that she was the person who had made him do it. She had made him think he could do anything. Nobody else took him seriously. But she made him believe that he could do whatever he wanted. He had felt her eyes on him all day today, following him about, though she never said a word, as if she were saying, "Yes, you can do it. I believe in you. I expect it of you." She had made him feel all that, and directly they got back, he looked for the lights of the house above the bay, he would go to her and say, "I've done it, Mrs. Ramsey, thanks to you." And so, turning into the lane that led to the house, he could see lights moving about in the upper windows. They must be awfully late then. People were getting ready for dinner. The house was all lit up, and the lights after the darkness made his eyes feel full, and he said to himself, childishly, as he walked up the drive, "Lights, lights, lights," and repeated in a dazed way, "Lights, lights, lights," as they came into the house, staring about him with his face quite stiff. But, good heavens, he said to himself, putting his hand to his tie, I must not make a fool of myself. Chapter 15. "Yes," said Prue in her considering way, answering her mother's question. "I think Nancy did go with them." Chapter 16. Well then, Nancy had gone with them, Mrs. Ramsey supposed, wondering, as she put down a brush, took up a comb, and said, "Come in," to a tap at the door. Jasper and Rose came in. Whether the fact that Nancy was with them made it less likely or more likely that anything would happen. It made it less likely somehow, Mrs. Ramsey thought, very irrationally, except that after all holocaust on such a scale was not probable. They could not all be drowned. And again she felt alone in the presence of her old antagonist, life. Jasper and Rose said that Mildred wanted to know whether she should wait dinner. "Not for the Queen of England," said Mrs. Ramsey emphatically. "Not for the Empress of Mexico," she added, laughing at Jasper, for he shared his mother's vice. He too exaggerated. And if Rose liked, she said, while Jasper took the message, she might choose which jewels she was to wear. When there are 15 people sitting down to dinner, one cannot keep things waiting forever. She was now beginning to feel annoyed with them for being so late. It was inconsiderate of them, and it annoyed her on top of her anxiety about them, that they should choose this very night to be out late, when in fact she wished the dinner to be particularly nice, since William Banks had at last consented to dine with them, and they were having Mildred's masterpiece, Boeuf en daube. Everything depended upon things being served up to the precise moment they were ready. The beef, the bay-leaf, and the wine all must be done to a turn. To keep it waiting was out of the question. Yet of course tonight, of all nights, out they went, and they came in late, and things had to be sent out, things had to be kept hot. The Boeuf en daube would be entirely spoilt. Jasper offered her an opal necklace, Rose a gold necklace. Which looked best against her black dress? Which did indeed, said Mrs. Ramsey absent-mindedly, looking at her neck and shoulders, but avoiding her face, in the glass. And then, while the children rummaged among her things, she looked out of the window at a sight which always amused her, the rooks trying to decide which tree to settle on. Every time they seemed to change their minds and rose up into the air again, because, she thought, the old rook, the father rook, old Joseph was her name for him, was a bird of a very trying and difficult disposition. He was a disreputable old bird, with half his wing feathers missing. He was like some seedy old gentleman in a top hat she had seen playing the horn in front of a public house. "Look," she said, laughing. They were actually fighting. Joseph and Mary were fighting. Anyhow, they all went up again, and the air was shoved aside by their black wings and cut into exquisite scimitar shapes. The movements of the wings beating out, 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 she could never describe it accurately enough to please herself, was one of the loveliest of all to her. "Look at that," she said to Rose, hoping that Rose would see it more clearly than she could. For one's children so often gave one's own perceptions a little thrust forwards. But which was it to be? They had all the trays of her jewel case open. The gold necklace, which was Italian, or the opal necklace, which Uncle James had brought her from India, or should she wear her amethysts? "Choose, dearests, choose," she said, hoping that they would make haste. But she let them take their time to choose. She let Rose, particularly, take up this and then that, and hold her jewels against the black dress, for this little ceremony of choosing jewels, which was gone through every night, was what Rose liked best, she knew. She had some hidden reason of her own for attaching great importance to this choosing what her mother was to wear. What was the reason, Mrs. Ramsey wondered, standing still to let her clasp the necklace she had chosen, divining, through her own past, some deep, some buried, some quite speechless feeling that one had for one's mother at Rose's age. Like all feelings felt for oneself, Mrs. Ramsey thought, it made one sad. It was so inadequate what one could give in return, and what Rose felt was quite out of proportion to anything she actually was. And Rose would grow up, and Rose would suffer, she supposed, with these deep feelings, and she said she was ready now, and they would go down, and Jasper, because he was the gentleman, should give her his arm, and Rose, as she was the lady, should carry her handkerchief. She gave her the handkerchief. And what else? Oh yes, it might be cold, a shawl. "Choose me a shawl," she said, for that would please Rose, who was bound to suffer so. "There," she said, stopping by the window on the landing. "There they are again." Joseph had settled on another tree-top. "Don't you think they mind," she said to Jasper, "having their wings broken?" Why did he want to shoot poor old Joseph and Mary? He shuffled a little on the stairs and felt rebuked, but not seriously, for she did not understand the fun of shooting birds. And they did not feel, and being his mother she lived away in another division of the world, but he rather liked her stories about Mary and Joseph. She made him laugh. But how did she know that those were Mary and Joseph? Did she think the same birds came to the same trees every night, he asked. But here, suddenly, like all grown-up people, she ceased to pay him the least attention. She was listening to a clatter in the hall. "They've come back!" she exclaimed, and at once she felt much more annoyed with them than relieved. Then she wondered, had it happened? She would go down and they would tell her. But no, they could not tell her anything with all these people about. So she must go down and begin dinner and wait. And, like some queen who, finding her people gathered in the hall, looks down upon them and descends among them, and acknowledges their tributes silently, and accepts their devotion and their prostration before her, Paul did not move a muscle but looked straight before him as she passed. She went down and crossed the hall, and bowed her head very slightly, as if she accepted what they could not say, their tribute to her beauty. But she stopped. There was a smell of burning. Could they have let the Bouffon d'Aube overboil, she wondered, pray heaven not, when the great clangour of the gong announced solemnly, authoritatively, that all those scattered about, in attics, in bedrooms, on little perches of their own, reading, writing, putting the last smooth to their hair, or fastening dresses, must leave all that, and the little odds and ends on their washing-tables and dressing-tables, and the novels on the bed-tables, and the diaries which were so private, and assemble in the dining-room for dinner. End of Section 6